Summary of Holes by Louis Sachar. At Camp Green Lake, there is neither an actual lake nor a camp. It used to be the biggest lake in Texas, but it hasn't had any water for the last 110 years. It is now a camp for bad boys, where every day the boys dig holes. The only person on the bus to Camp Green Lake is Stanley Yelnats. He tries to act like he's going to a real summer camp so he can meet new people since he gets picked on at home for being overweight. Stanley didn't do anything wrong, but he was found guilty because his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather stole a pig and cursed all of his offspring because of it. No one in Stanley's family really thinks this, even though a lot of bad things do happen. When Stanley gets off the bus, he is taken care of by a guy named Mr. Sir. Stanley puts on an orange jumpsuit as Mr. Sir tells him he has to dig a 5-foot deep, 5-foot wide hole every day and should tell a psychologist about anything interesting he finds. Tent D is where Stanley meets his guide, Mr. Pendanski, and the other guests. Mr. Pendanski calls them by their real names when he introduces them, but the boys call themselves X-Ray, Squid, Magnet, Armpit, Zigzag, and Zero when they talk about themselves. Stanley takes his 4-minute cold shower and eats dinner. The other boys don't believe that Stanley is at camp for taking famous baseball player Clyde Livingston's shoes. As Stanley walked home from school, a pair of smelly shoes fell from the sky and landed on him. Stanley thought that the shoes were the key to his father's latest invention, so he ran to show them to his father. His folks didn't have enough money to pay for a lawyer to protect him. As Stanley starts to dig his first hole, the storyteller tells Stanley about his great-great-grandfather, Ilya Yelnats. At age 15, Ilya fell in love with Myra Menke in Latvia. Myra's father, on the other hand, wanted her to marry 57-year-old pig farmer Igor Barkov. Ilya asked for help from his friend Madame Zeroni. She said Myra was stupid and selfish, but she still agreed to help Ilya. She gave Ilya a small, sickly piglet and told him to take it every day to a nearby mountain where it could drink from a stream while Ilya sang it a special song. Ilya was supposed to take Madame Zeroni up the hill after Myra's birthday. If he didn't do what she said, she'd curse his heirs for all time. Ilya did what he was told, and both he and the pig got big and strong. On the last day, Ilya didn't take his pig up the hill, though. Instead, he took a bath. Myra's father let her choose Igor or the pig because they both weighed the same. Myra wouldn't choose, so Ilya got on a ship headed for America. He didn't know until later that he'd broken his word to Madame Zeroni. After Ilya got married and had the first Stanley, the curse started to seem real in America. Stanley plays his first hole in the present. He spends a few minutes in the recreation room, which is called the rec room, and then realizes that his tent mates have called him the caveman. He then lies to Stanley's mother in a letter he sends to Stanley's mother about how much fun he is having at camp. Over his shoulder, he sees Zero reading. Stanley finds a fish fossil on the second day, even though Mr. Pendanski says the warden isn't interested in fossils. The group's boss, X-Ray, tells Stanley that he needs to give him anything else he finds. Stanley has been at camp for a year and hasn't found anything. Later that afternoon, Stanley joins Mr. Pendanski in a group he is leading. Even though no one takes it seriously, the boys talk about what they want to do when they get out. Mr. Pendanski talks about taking care of yourself and calls Zero dumb. One day, Stanley finds a metal tube in the dirt. On one end, KB is written in a heart. He gives it to X-Ray and tells him to find it the next day. Stanley tries to talk to X-Ray about the tube over breakfast the next morning, but X-Ray won't talk about it. The next morning, X-Ray finds the tube and the warden comes out to watch the digging. The boys dig in the same spot for a week, and Stanley figures out that the warden is looking for something. Zero tells Stanley one afternoon that he doesn't know how to read, and he asks Stanley to teach him. Stanley says that he can't teach because he doesn't know how and doesn't have the energy. The next morning, while Mr. Sir is filling canteens, Magnet steals his sunflower seeds. The boys take turns passing them around, but Stanley drops one in his hole just as Mr. Sir comes back to look for them. Stanley takes the credit, and Mr. Sir takes Stanley to talk to the warden. At the warden's house, the warden uses rattlesnake venom to make red nail polish that she puts on her nails. When Mr. Sir bothers her, she hits him hard. When Stanley goes back to his hole, he finds that Zero has been digging for him. In the afternoon of that day, Stanley thinks about the first Stanley, who kissin' Kate Barlow robbed and left in this desert. He must have found safety on God's thumb, but when he was saved, he had no idea what that meant. Stanley later offers to help Zero learn to read. In return for lessons, Zero agrees to help Stanley dig some of his holes. The storyteller goes back to the 1880s, when Green Lake was a town right on the lake. Everyone liked Miss Catherine Barlow, but Charles Trout Walker was especially fond of her. Trout Walker, on the other hand, was dumb and proud of it. He was also rich and spoiled. When Miss Catherine turned him down, he was very angry. Not long after that, Sam, the man who sold onions, offered to fix up Miss Catherine's broken-down schoolhouse. Sam made the classroom look great over the course of a few months. One night, when it was raining, they finally kissed. Someone saw them, and the next day, a group of angry people burned down the school because Sam was black. Instead of helping Catherine, the sheriff asked her for a kiss. Catherine and Sam tried to get across the lake, but Trout Walker shot Sam and rescued Catherine. 3 days later, Catherine shot the sheriff, kissed him, and became a feared outlaw for the next 20 years. She went back to Green Lake when it was a dead town. Trout Walker and Linda, his wife, found her there. They tried to get her to tell them where her wealth was, but a yellow-spotted snake bit her, and she died laughing and telling them to dig. In the present, Mr. Sir's face grows as big as a watermelon. He doesn't give Stanley any water when he brings water. Stanley keeps teaching Zero to read, and Zero picks it up quickly, even though the other boys make fun of Stanley and call him a slave master when Zero digs. Stanley finds out that Zero's real name is Hector Zeroni. One morning, Stanley looks out into the distance and sees a rock creation that looks like a thumbs-up sign. He wonders if this is God's thumb. The next day, Mr. Pendanski brings lunch. Zigzag starts to push Stanley, and Mr. Pendanski tries to start a fight. As Mr. Pendanski shoots his gun to call the warden, Zero saves Stanley from Zigzag. Zigzag tells the warden what Stanley and Zero have agreed to do. She says the lessons should stop, and Mr. Pendanski says Zero is too dumb to learn anything anyway. Zero hits Mr. Pendanski in the face with a shovel and then walks into the desert. Stanley thinks about going after Zero for the next few days. Stanley asks the warden, Mr. Sir, and Mr. Pendanski where Zero is, and they tell him that they are going to destroy Zero's records. Since he is a state child, nobody cares about him. Stanley plans to steal the water truck and save Zero on the day that Group D gets a new boy, Twitch. He drives the truck into a hole and then keeps going into the desert on foot. He thinks the thumbs-up sign is telling him to keep going. In the afternoon, he finds Zero hiding under an old boat in a cave. He's been eating something he calls splush, which is some kind of fruit jam. He gives Stanley his last jar, and then the two of them decide to go to God's thumb. Zero starts to get terrible stomach cramps, but he is still able to walk all the way to the edge of the lake bed, climb up the rocks on the other side, and then start up the mountain. Zero throws up and then passes out at one point. Stanley leaves their shovel and the jars they saved behind and starts to carry Zero up the hill. Stanley falls into a wet ditch near the top and finds water and an onion. He gives some to Zero, and the two of them rest for the next 2 days. Zero tells Stanley that he took Clyde Livingston's shoes from the homeless shelter, and Stanley sings him Ilya's song. Zero tells Stanley about his mother as he gets better. They used to live in a house, but they had to steal everything they needed. Zero thought he was doing a better thing by taking old shoes from the homeless shelter instead of new ones when he stole them. Stanley and Zero decide to go back to camp, try to find Kate Barlow's wealth where Stanley found the tube, and then run away. Zero talks more about his mom as he and Stanley walk. They try not to drink water. They find the hole that night and start digging. Stanley is shocked to find a bag and is able to get it out of the way in the end. As he gives it to Zero, the warden, Mr. Sir, and Mr. Pendanski walk in. The adults, on the other hand, run away in horror because the hole is a nest for yellow-spotted lizards and both boys are covered in lizards. After a few hours, Stanley and Zero are still living, and the adults are talking about shooting them to get the wealth. The warden tells their story as well. Stanley was crazy, fell into a hole, and snakes ate him. Mr. Sir tells Stanley that he is innocent and that his lawyer came to get him yesterday, but Stanley is too busy to listen. At last, they see an approaching car. A young woman says that she is Stanley's lawyer, Ms. Marengo, and then introduces the Texas Attorney General. The warden tries to tell them that Stanley tried to steal her bag, but her story doesn't make sense. After a few minutes, Stanley is able to crawl out of the hole and help Zero stand up. When the warden tries to take Zero's bag, Zero points out that Stanley's name is written on it. After finishing the papers, Ms. Moreno tries to get Stanley to leave, but he won't go without Zero. Ms. Marengo and the Attorney General find that Zero's papers are lost, so Ms. Marengo takes Zero with her. In the car, she says that Stanley's dad made something to get rid of foot odor, and she acts like she didn't hear Zero say that he took Clyde Livingston's shoes. At Green Lake, it starts to rain. The narrator says that Stanley's father had his breakthrough on the day that Ilya Yelnats's great-great-great-grandson brought Madame Zeroni's great-great-great-grandson up the mountain. This is true whether or not you believe in the curse. Camp Green Lake is going to be a Girl Scout camp, and Stanley and Zero will each get about $1 million from the money in the bag. A year and a half later, Stanley and Hector go to a party to watch Clyde Livingston's new ad for Stanley's father's idea. Hector is sitting with his mother, and his mother is singing a version of the song that Madame Zeroni taught Ilya.
About the author. Louis Sachar was born in East Meadow, New York, and grew up there until he was 9 years old. Then, he and his family went to California. Even though he went to the University of California at Berkeley to study business, he became interested in reading and writing when he was in high school. Sachar worked as a teacher's aide at a neighborhood grade school while he was still in school, and he loved it. This job and the kids he worked with gave him ideas for his first children's book, Sideways Stories from Wayside School, which was accepted by a publisher during his first week of law school. After he got his law degree, Sachar worked in the legal field part-time while he wrote. In 1989, he quit the legal field to write full-time. In 1985, he got married, and in 1987, his daughter was born. Holes is one of Sachar's most well-known books. It won the prestigious Newbery Medal in 1999, and in 2003, Disney made it into a movie. Sachar wrote the script for the movie. He lives in Texas with his wife.
Hope we summarized it fully and you liked it. Please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so that we are motivated to create more videos.